listening
Pleasure.
to Boris Johnson a couple of hours ago and his speech. We were just listening to a clip of it. But the overall mood, there wasn't much of a mea culpa in that speech. Does it sound to you like he's grasped the reality that he needs to leave 10 Downing Street?
No, I mean, it's really striking that there was no mea culpa, no hint of remorse, no hint in any way that he might be partly to blame for the circumstances he finds himself in. Instead, I think he managed to aggravate even those colleagues who were sympathetic by talking about herd behaviour and that they were all flocking out of his camp and into other camps. I think the reality is he's always found it difficult to say, I'm sorry. And even when he was forced to say sorry, for example, in the Commons over Partygate, he then went to a meeting of the 1922 committee and undermined the very apology he'd just given. So I think he is really just not aware of the implications of his own recent behaviour.
Yeah, and it looks as well as though like we're looking at two different timetables here. Johnson's timetable seems to be, oh, I'll stay on until the autumn and sort of see what happens. But perhaps his party wants a rather quicker replacement and solution. Now, which of those two timetables do you think is most likely to win over?
I think they will try to get a quick decision this side of the summer recess because what they're worried about is how the government will carry on functioning. Remember, several members of his cabinet have either resigned or have come out and said he's not fit to be a prime minister. How does he sit round the cabinet table and work alongside them? And of course, we're not just going into the dog days of summer. There is the UK is a very active participant in supporting the Ukrainians in the war with Russia. There's a very serious cost of living crisis in the UK. And not to mention the problems with the National Health Service. A government needs to govern, not to be constantly infighting. And that's the risk if he stays in post until the autumn.
With all the other sort of leadership contests I can look back on, in my lifetime at any rate, I mean, there's always been a pretty obvious person waiting in the wings, and there doesn't seem to be this time. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps share your thoughts with our audience, who would be the most likely person, in your view, to be replacing Boris Johnson?
Well, I think there's probably three or four. The person who thinks she is the most obvious is Liz Truss, currently Foreign Secretary. She is currently the darling of the right, and she has been spending the last couple of years cultivating the right of the party. She is the biggest risk for the country and for the EU because she's taken such a hard line over the Northern Ireland Protocol. The People's favourite is Ben Wallace, who's currently Defence Secretary and is perceived to have been doing some very good things in respect of the war with Ukraine. The third possibility is Rishi Sunak, who was until Tuesday the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was thought by the markets to have done a good job as Chancellor of the Exchequer, frustrated Boris Johnson because he was reluctant to open the purse strings. But what he has against him in the eyes of some is that his wife is a billionaire heiress and is a non-dom, which means she's not resident in the UK for tax purposes, although she is now paying tax in the UK. And so some people would say that it counts against him because he doesn't really understand what cost of living crisis might be. They're probably the front runners. And then there are a large number of other people talking about running, for example, Suella Braverman, who is currently the Attorney General, Steve Baker, also on the right, but he's not run any ministry, and Sajid Javid, who was until Tuesday the Health Secretary. He was the first one of the Cabinet to resign in the face of the allegations against Boris Johnson over his failure to handle the concerns about the Deputy Chief Whip effectively.
Okay, so